Howard Beck joins us on loan from Bleacher Report, senior NBA writer. His most recent column, Bryant to Shaq, 2 decades after one of the wildest turning points in NBA history. Lakers, Blazers, royalty recall the lob that tied Kobe and Shaq together forever, sparked a three-peat, and upended a powerhouse. Good morning, Howard. When did you decide to do Bryant to Shaq?
Good morning, Dan. And let me just humbly say that without saying it publicly, I think this is one of the greatest oral histories I've ever written.
Well done.
Obviously I covered that series for the LA Daily News back in the day, and it was just always one of my favorite games, one of my favorite moments, that lob, and one of my favorite series. And it's also just this wonderful sliding doors moment because, of course, they were down 15 in the fourth quarter of that game and probably arguably should have lost. And if they had, there is no dynasty, and the Blazers probably win the championship, and history is much different. And I've wanted to return to this for a long time. I almost did it 4 years ago. In fact, your upcoming guest, Bob Costas, and I spoke 4 years ago when I first started poking around to do something on this. It got shelved at the time. We revived it more recently, unfortunately, for 2 reasons: the 20th anniversary of that game, and also, of course, the passing of Kobe in January.
Favorite interview with this was who?
Well, I got 5 players from each team, plus Mike Dunleavy Sr. Phil Jackson and I emailed a little bit, but that was it. So I got a lot of great voices. I think out of all of them, Bonzi was really great. Bonzi was a lot of fun. Bonzi Wells was one of these guys who back in the day, I think had kind of, this jaded view of him, the reputation because of those Blazers teams at the time, that he was looked at as kind of a young knucklehead and, part of that crew that was often derided as the jail Blazers, which I think is a terrible, unfortunate term that still unfortunately lives. Bonzi was wonderful. He could tell you all of the pain and anguish of being part of that collapse, but in a way that history and time has given him the perspective of it. He was candid. He was fun to talk to. He told me this great thing that did not make the piece, which I just want to throw in real quick. He said that before Game 7, which on a Sunday, that night, a Saturday night, he says, I went to bed at 10 o'clock. I went to bed at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night in LA because I knew I had to deal with Kobe. And I knew that Kobe Bryant wasn't going to be out partying on a Saturday night. And so the only person on earth who could make me go to bed at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night in LA was Kobe.
Yeah, you look back on that era, and I remember saying it when they broke up, that we'll remember what they didn't accomplish and not necessarily what they did accomplish. Do you know what the real core, the reason was that Shaq and Kobe broke up?
It was layered, Dan. I mean, the easy reductive version is, well, Kobe didn't want him there anymore, and Kobe had all the leverage in the world because he was entering free agency. And if Shaq had stayed, Kobe could have walked across the hallway to the Clippers, which he had flirted with doing all season, and in fact had sent very strong signals, including to Mike Dunleavy, who was at that time the coach of the Clippers, and I think GM as well. So there was that, and that's not to be diminished, but there were other factors. Shaq wanted a max extension, which at that time, remember, Shaq's salary had been grandfathered in before there were maxes in the NBA. There was no max salary when he got his big deal to join the Lakers in the first place. So they were constantly building on this huge salary that was bigger than anybody else's, and he was getting up there in just years and mileage. He, of course, had some serious injuries, or at least nagging injuries. So Jerry Buss didn't want to give him the extension to the extent that Shaq wanted it. So Shaq had been pouting all year about that. And so that was a big part of it too, Dan. But yeah, listen, at the core of it, you could see it in the 2004 finals against Detroit. Kobe and Shaq wanted nothing to do with each other by that point. They hadn't been split up technically, but they were already done.
Talking to Howard Beck, Bleacher Report senior NBA writer, the column, and it's a deep dive. It's great. There's so much detail here, and talking to the principals involved in this. Bryant to Shaq, it's on Bleacher Report. I was talking about Wilt Chamberlain's place in history, and it feels like we don't embrace him the way we do Babe Ruth. There's certain guys that we pick and choose of what we point out or what we leave out. Bill Russell was a flawed offensive player, shot 44% from the floor, wasn't a good free throw shooter, but he won 11 titles. Kobe won 5, but he can't be Michael, so, how high do you put him up? Like, it's weird how we pick and choose. Tim Duncan, he's the greatest power forward of all time. He's a center, but he wanted to be a power forward. I just don't know, in 10 or 15 years from now, who is in the top 10 now that won't be in the top 10 greatest players of all time. Who's going to fall out and who's going in your opinion?
Oh boy. I guess it depends on who's in your top 10 right now. It's and by the way, like for me, every time I'm ever asked this, I always punt, and it's not because I'm trying to be cowardly or squeamish. It's just comparing players and teams across the eras in the NBA, maybe more than any other sport, is just impossible. The game has evolved so much, has changed in so many dramatic ways. The style of play, the pace of play. Even the obviously the width of the key, like everything changes, and so it's hard to make these comparisons, Dan. And you were alluding to it earlier before I came on about the narratives or the taglines that we affix to each of these guys, and I think they're appropriate because it's our shorthand way of encapsulating what they meant, right? What Bill Russell meant was he was the ultimate champion. We don't get into the stats and the nitty gritty, and we don't have as much data for that era anyway. It stands on its own. He was the greatest champion of all time. Wilt, the most dominant of all time. And it doesn't matter how many championships he won. Michael Jordan is just simply the GOAT. And LeBron is trying to challenge him for that. And some people think it's a 1-2 race, and others say, no, you're forgetting Kareem, who was the real greatest of all time. You can go round and round on this. I mean, Kevin Durant, you asked who's going to break in.
Yeah.
If Kevin Durant's not already in, I think he should be.
Yeah, I left him out. So you got Steph, who's going to be in. Durant's going to be in. And I guess I got to make way for the Greek Freak to maybe be a top 10 player of all time if he wins titles.
I'll stop short on that one only because he's still so early in his career. You can see the outline of one of the all-time greats, and skill set wise and impact on the game over the last couple of years, you can already say that he's there. But longevity matters too, right? The imprint you make needs to last at least kind of a half decade to a decade. So let's wait until we've seen the longevity and how far he can take it all. But yeah, just the sheer dominance on the court, you could put his skill set, his total package of skills up against anybody.
How do you think history treats James Harden?
That's a really, really interesting one. And this is a big, as weird as this postseason is going to be in the Orlando bubble, it's a really important one for him because he's going to turn 31, I think, this summer, maybe during the bubble. And, he's got all the accolades, all the individual accomplishments. He is one of the greatest scorers of all time. But, this is when we start really, picking somebody apart. Well, he was one of the greatest scorers we've ever seen, but the aesthetics of his game weren't that appealing to a lot of people. He was one of the greatest scorers of all time, but he never made the finals. He never won a ring. And so he's got that, hanging over him right now. And if he never wins the big one, look, there's we have a long list of guys, Charles Barkley and Karl Malone and John Stockton, Patrick Ewing, guys who we know are all-time greats who never won the big one. It happens. There is some elements of luck and timing and supporting cast and all these other things. But Harden has the added difficulty in this discussion of his own performance is what has often held his teams back in the postseason. So he does have that burden to bear.
But do you think, does history look favorably more so on Russell Westbrook or James Harden?
I think history will look better on James Harden than Russell Westbrook.
Okay.
And look, my bias in this discussion is that of the two of them, I've always thought James Harden was the better overall offensive weapon. Let's face it, neither one of them is going to ever be known for their defense. They're both great playmakers in different ways. And Westbrook had the gaudier stats if you want to count just the triple doubles, which I think have become a little exaggerated in terms of importance, as impressive as it is. Harden is far, far, far more efficient. He is miles better from three-point range and just overall more efficient, whether you're using true shooting percentage or effective field goal percentage or any other measure. Harden is the more efficient player.
Let me go back to your column before I touch on the NBA's plan to return. Where do you rank Shaq and Kobe of greatest duos in NBA history?
It's tough. I mean, I don't want to use my backdoor out here as I did earlier because I already pulled that card.
Okay,
once.
give me your best duos of all time. You don't have to rank.
So, all right. No, well, look, the one that leaps to mind immediately is Michael and Scottie. They were just the versatility, the two-way impact of the two of them, offensively and defensively. They were just phenomenal. Those teams were beautiful to watch. It was great that we got The Last Dance recently because whether you were, in our age range and had lived through it, watched it as fans, and just got the refresher, or if you were younger fans who never saw them, they just played an incredible brand of basketball. Obviously, Magic and Kareem are right up there. Shaq and Kobe are in the discussion. There's no question. And Shaq, the way Shaq always puts it, and I think did again in my story, is that they're the best, big man guard combo of all time.
Would you put him over Kareem and Magic? Because I wouldn't.
It's tough. Kareem has more overall accomplishments than Shaq. You might lean Kobe over Magic, although Magic's playmaking and maybe the greatest point guard of all time, generally considered that. It's tough. I don't know. I think if you asked Laker fans that, it would be completely breaking along generational lines.
Probably so. We have an idea, a losers tournament, the 8 teams that don't get invited to Orlando. Why not allow them to be, you have a warm-up band when you go see, the Rolling Stones. So you have a warm-up act where you have the 8 teams playing, and they play it over 3 games, and then the winner of the tournament gets the number 1 pick in the draft. Single elimination, number 1 pick in the draft, and it's a losers tournament. We eliminate tanking here for good, Howard.
So this is not just for 2020. This is in perpetuity?
Well, let's start this year and then see how it works.
I love the idea, and I love anything that incentivizes the worst teams to actually try.
Here comes the butt. Come on, give me the butt here.
But not this year, because the whole point of the exercise in Orlando is safety. And so the reason we're going 22 and not 30, and frankly, I think it should have been 16, is that more bodies, more teams equals more risk, more tests, more everything. So if you now take the other 8 and put them in their own bubble somewhere and have the losers tournament, you've got to deal with all the coronavirus concerns all over again. There's my
buzzkill. What a buzzkill.
I'm sorry.
The team to beat when this tournament starts is?
The Lakers. They have LeBron. They were the team with the most momentum going into the suspension of the season. They had just beaten the Bucks and Clippers over that prior weekend. And, I picked the Clippers back in October, Dan, and I still feel like top to bottom, the Clippers have the overall better depth collection of talent, and they've got an element in Lou Williams that the Lakers just don't have. They both have a top 2, but the Clippers have a third guy who can drop 25 on a given night. The Lakers just don't. And so I still lean that way intellectually, but the Lakers had the momentum. Now, does momentum get you from March 11th through this massive gap to July 31st? Probably not, but they deserve the benefit of the doubt.
Your wild card team to win it all.
Ooh, I don't think there's a wild card in the West. It's either the Lakers or the Clippers.
The Rockets, you don't think? See, I looked at the Rockets and said, if they happen to capture Magic in a bottle here with their small ball, then they're the team that I would be I would look at them as the outlier here in the West.
They're fun for that reason because they've just got the firepower is amazing. And yes, maybe if things break their way, a couple calls, plus there's no home court advantage.
Yeah.
And we don't know what anybody's going to look like when they come back or what kind of chemistry or rhythm anybody is in. I still think they rely too much on individual talent. James Harden's going to score this time. Russell Westbrook's going to score this time. There's no real collaborative effort there. And that's what breaks down in the playoffs. If you are a superb individual talent, but the rest of the cast is not involved, there's so much isolation play. I think that's where it breaks down for the Rockets. I think the sleepers are in the East. If the Bucks are going in as everybody's, kind of agreed upon favorite, and they should be, Toronto's really strong, even without Kawhi. They've had a phenomenal season. I love the Celtics' young talent and the way they were coming together. I wouldn't put it out of the possibility that
pick one, Howard. You get one. Come on.
Okay, it's Toronto then.
Okay.
They're the defending champs, so that feels cheap, but they're the defending champs without the MVP of the finals.
Yeah, I liked Boston. I guess Philadelphia, are they an outlier here?
I think Philly is in the East what the Rockets are in the West. A lot of question marks, but the talent is there. And now that they've had all this time for Simmons and Embiid to get healthy, there's a shot.
He's Howard Beck, Bleacher Report's senior NBA writer, and it's a great read. You don't have to be a Laker fan. If you're a Blazer fan, you're not going to enjoy this, but it's called Bryant to Shaq, and it's on Bleacher Report. Howard, great to talk to you again. Are you going to Orlando?
Still weighing that right now. I'm not going to go in for the bubble because that requires that long lockdown and way too much time away and very little payoff in terms of access. I'm weighing whether to go just for the finals, but that would probably be it, unfortunately.
Good to talk to you. Thank you, Howard.
Appreciate you, Dan. Thank you.